Okay, welcome back. Anyone who hasn't been here before, welcome to Topic Stage 3. My name is Anna McDougall, Director of Product and Engineering at Axel Springer National Media and Tech, and I'm very happy to introduce Konstantin Tiber to you. He's a staff software engineer at LeanIX and an accessibility advocate, and he will be presenting the what, why, who, and how of accessibility on the web. Please give him a warm round of applause.
All right, welcome everybody. Thanks so much for joining my talk. My name is Konstantin Tiber. I'm going to present to you the who, the what, why, who and how of accessibility on the web. I work as a software engineer at LeanIX, where I build frontends using the Angular framework, and I like to build my frontends accessible. And today I want to show you how you can also do that. Now, who am I to talk about it? I'm not an accessibility expert. I would consider myself an accessibility nerd. On this slide, you can see a picture of me pretending to use a screen reader while being blindfolded. I've started my accessibility journey in 2015, where I was working at a web agency, and one of our clients was the Gemeinsame Bundesausschuss. That's a public agency. They need to approve medical products in Germany, and such public agencies, when they provide web services, they need to be accessible by law. No negotiation possible. I also blogged about this topic, so you can read more about this on the LeanIX engineering blog. Now, let's get into the talk. And I want to reward you for taking the time to come to this talk at this time of the day after watching many talks. So I had the idea to take you all on a beach vacation. We're going to the accessibility beach, and yeah, we'll just enjoy some nice views and learn about accessibility. There we go. I just took this picture last week in France. So, what is accessibility? The notion of this beach is, I chose it because you can think about your web knowledge as an island. And if you learn more things about the web, about accessibility, your island grows. And the sea around it, that is unknown stuff. And as your island grows, so does the beach. And you can think about it in a way that the longer your beach, the more questions you can discover. And this can be applied to any kind of topic that you want to learn, and it really gets me excited to dig deeper into topics, to ask even better questions. And what I would like to inspire is for you to start the same accessibility journey that I have started in 2015. So let's start off with the what. What is accessibility? In short, web accessibility is about enabling all humans to use web services regardless of their physical or situational disability. And we'll get into that right away after we talk about the term disability itself. What does disability mean? And I have found a definition that I like quite a lot in a paper. It's disability emerges where there is a mismatch between individual capacities and environmental demands. If we would all be deaf, we might not have stairs, because deaf people can communicate better while walking when they're walking on ramps, things like that. That's a nice way to think about it. A lot of our products are inaccessible because the people who don't face the struggles of people with disabilities don't have the empathy out of the box. And why would they? This is why it's important to inform ourselves actively about the challenges that people with disabilities face. There's a nonprofit organization that focuses on web accessibility. It's called WebAIM, and they differentiate 4 categories of disabilities. There's visual disabilities, like low vision, blindness, color blindness. There's hearing disabilities. There's motor disabilities, such as limited motion or not even having arms. And finally, cognitive disabilities. And there's different scenarios that apply for each category, and it's good to be aware of each of them. One thing that was also very interesting to me when I first learned it is it's really not about people who are permanently disabled. Especially now in the pandemic and home office being on the rise, there's a lot of new situations where people benefit from accessible web interfaces. Take, for example, a parent who's holding their baby on their right arm, which they usually use to navigate the mouse, and then wanting to navigate a website using the keyboard. There's the Microsoft Inclusive Design Toolkit that provides some very good resources, and one of them is this graphic, which shows you for each of these disability categories what would be a permanent one, a temporary one, and a situational one. Another one I really like is a person who has misplaced their glasses. If you can't zoom on a web page after you misplaced your glasses, that's quite annoying. All right, so we now have a common understanding of what accessibility is. Next up, I'm going to explain to you why you should care about it. This is especially important when you want to sell the topic to your managers and get the investment to actually build accessible user interfaces. First and foremost, like with any business, it should be about your customers. Generally, if you build accessible user interfaces, it will result in a better user experience as well. And with accessibility, it's kind of straightforward. You can reach a wider range of customers. For example, I talked about public agencies being required for the services that they provide to be accessible. You can't get deals with certain public agencies depending on your product if you are not accessible by the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So there's money waiting, and accessibility is a tool to get you there. And I think it's also nice when my grandmother can book a doctor's appointment on the doctor's websites like I do, because they have built an accessible user interface. So it's nice to live in a society where, especially now in the pandemic, where everything, in the pandemic, where everything is becoming more and more digital, that these services are accessible and usable by everyone. One challenge, as I said, is to train empathy for disabilities and what it means to live with them. And there's a very good resource published by the Web Accessibility Initiative. It's these perspective videos. And they're short videos that showcase challenges of people with different disabilities, and I highly recommend checking them out. It really doesn't take a long time, and for anyone building software, I think it's a required watch. All right, there's another topic which can help you sell accessibility to your managers. I don't think it's really needed from an intuitive standpoint. I think it comes very naturally that you would want your websites to be usable by anyone, but still this is an important one, and it's becoming even more important in the coming years, and that's the law. On this slide you can see a fake mockshot of me because I was using divs as buttons. there are several laws that I would like to mention here that are most important to our area that we work in, both geographically, mostly geographically. There's the Barrierefreiheitsinformationstechnikverordnung, BITV 2.0, and this one was passed in 2016, I think, and that's the one that requires public agencies to make all their websites accessible. Some new advancements come through the European Accessibility Act. That is a new guideline published by the EU in 2019, and it's already been transposed into national law in Germany with the Barrierefreiheitsstärkungsgesetz. And the Barrierefreiheitsstärkungsgesetz will result in, for example, if you want to launch an e-commerce website in 2025, you cannot launch it without it being accessible based on the World Wide Web Consortium standards. And that's a really cool thing. It's still not covering every websites out there. It's mostly about things that are essential to society. But I can tell you there's more and more coming, and I look forward to it. If we look across the sea, there's the Americans with Disabilities Act. A lot of groups and private people are actively suing a lot of companies in the US, like Netflix or Target, to make their websites accessible, and they do that successfully. So this is also a nice reason to care about accessibility, so that you don't need to pay a fine. So we've talked about what accessibility is, why you should care about it. Who actually tells us what accessibility means? Who defines it? And here I would like to introduce the World Wide Web Consortium. Who of you knows the World Wide Web Consortium? A show of hands. Great, 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 great. So they standardize all things around the web. It was founded by Tim Berners-Lee in 1994. You can see him here in the picture sitting next to a computer screen. And they have a sub-initiative called the Web Accessibility Initiative, which publishes the WCAG. WCAG stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And these guidelines are the standard for pretty much all national policies around the world when they talk about having accessible web services. There's 3 levels of conformance: A, AA, and AAA. And AA is the one that most policies require. And yeah, you need to put in more effort with each level. And they are categorized, all these guidelines in the WCAG guidelines, in 4 principles. The first one is that content must be perceivable. So you should be able to see it. Even if you can't see, doesn't matter. Somehow you should be able to perceive the content. It should be operable, so that you can navigate all that is on a web page, regardless of who you are or what devices you're using. It should be understandable. I think German agencies are pretty bad at that at times. I'm sure you've received some of the letters where you think, what are they talking about? But yeah, you should make sure that all groups of people can understand your content. That might also mean that you have an easy language button on your page to switch to a version of your website that has even more simplified terms. And finally, your web services should be robust. So there's also a saying, nice URLs don't change or don't break. So if you shared a URL 5 years ago, it would be nice if that still works today. And there's several other points about robust web applications. So these are the poor principles. Now, aside from the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, there's also ARIA. ARIA is also a project by the Web Accessibility Initiative, and it stands for Accessible Rich Internet Applications. ARIA is a superset of HTML. Maybe you've seen this a few times. There's HTML elements, and then there's an attribute on it. It starts with ARIA minus, and then something like ARIA minus hidden equals true. So you basically spread these ARIA attributes on your HTML elements. And ARIA is especially important for screen reader users. What is a screen reader? Screen readers are software that translate content, may it be text or images, on websites to, and also the whole operating system, like Windows or Mac OS, to speech or Braille. There's, I'll just mention 3 screen readers. There's NVDA, JAWS, and Apple VoiceOver. Yeah, so screen readers are very important, especially for blind people. And through ARIA, we can make the experience for screen reader users a lot better. So it's important to know that ARIA exists. And I included a link here. If any one of you is building their own component library, I highly recommend checking out the ARIA patterns for building components. Like if you've ever built a drop-down or a tab group or an accordion, I don't know from the top of my head which keyboard events I should listen to in a drop-down. Or if you commit the ultimate sin and use a div as a button, you might forget to listen for the space key for interaction and only listen to the enter key. And on the ARIA patterns website, you will find a really nice overview. It has just been relaunched, the design, that helps you build your UI components in a way so that they are usable for all kinds of devices, which is really cool. I highly recommend checking that out. Saves you a lot of time as well. You don't have to come up with it yourself, and then it might even be wrong. Since I won't go too deep into ARIA in this talk, I will point you to Leonie Watson. She's an amazing accessibility ambassador. She also runs a company based in the UK called Tetralogical. Yeah, this is a wonderful talk. I really like this slide. Perfect is the enemy of good. And this is also something that I really want to emphasize. The amount of things to watch out for with accessibility can be daunting. But every small improvement counts. So even if you just make one button on a page that was previously hidden with visibility none instead of opacity 0 and therefore not accessible to keyboard users, that's already a great improvement. Every little step counts. And eventually, your website will become more and more accessible. OK, so this is you on the accessibility beach, and there's a lot of facts being thrown around. And I'd like to change things up and come to the actionable part, real tips and tricks that you can use starting today to make your websites more accessible. But first, there's one more topic while we're on the question of who that I want to address. And that is who should be responsible for it. So we learned who defined it, but who is responsible. And here, I would argue it's everyone. So from designers to product managers to people in customer support to engineers, the most inconvenient thing that can happen is that an accessibility issue is raised once the design is already on the table of the person who is going to implement it. There's the notion of shifting accessibility left in the product development process. So from the first drafts, the first ideas, the first mock-ups, think about how can we make this accessible. Especially, one thing that I encounter many times, if you're going to design a user interface that has a lot of drag and drop interactions, think about keyboard users. Just a personal anecdote. All right, now that's out of the way. I hope I didn't scare you off too much. I think you're on a great path by already being here, so great job. And as promised, we'll jump into the how. One very easy trick that you can apply is to use semantic HTML elements. I talked about how bad it is to use divs as buttons. Same goes for if you have a list on your website, make it a UL or an OL. Don't make it a bunch of divs. You could, but you get a lot of accessibility out of the box. If you use divs for this stuff, make sure you visit the ARIA website and implement their patterns. But generally, the native HTML semantic elements do a great job. Also, for mobile users, for example, I personally much prefer the native drop-downs of HTML over some JavaScript semantic UI, not too bad semantic UI, but any component library where, as a mobile user, I have to use the same kind of drop-down as desktop users do. You try it out. Compare a native HTML select on your phone with one that is built with a JavaScript component, and I guarantee you'll enjoy the native one a lot more. Now, that's scratching the surface. Let's jump to another short thing that's easy to remember. Any action that can be done using a mouse should also be possible using a keyboard. If you adhere to this, you'll also be one step closer to having a pretty good experience for many devices that users use to browse your websites. And let's get a little more comprehensive. Let's say maybe you actually do want to have these public agencies as your customers and get all the money in the world. Then you will probably need checklists. And I talked about the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. This is a video of the website, The Accessibility Project. They have a neatly designed checklist that I like to use when I really want to check all the boxes. And they use the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines as a base. The Web Accessibility Initiative also publishes their own dashboard with all the guidelines, but it can be a little overwhelming. Still, I do recommend checking it out. It's called the WCAG Quick Ref. OK, so checklists are a great tool. I'm now going to present you with my own know in your sleep checklist. So if I'm going to break into your home and wake you up and ask you, tell me the accessibility checklist, then you should name me these following things. Form inputs must have a label. This one is a pretty bad form input. The screen reader would not be able to associate the paragraph text above the input with the input itself. The right way to do this is to either wrap the input in the label element, or you give the input an ID and use the for attribute with that ID on the label. And then, when screen reader users actually focus on your input, the screen reader will be able to tell them that it's not just some input, but it's an input that asks you to enter your age. This is really crucial, and simple to do. Images must have an alt attribute. So that one doesn't have one. Here are two examples of valid alt attributes. The first one actually describes what's in the image. The second one is just empty. Now, why is that? That's because the background puppies picture is only presentational. It does not convey any meaning on my website. And while one might think, well, then I can omit the alt attribute altogether, you should actually set it to an empty string. So that is also a common pitfall. buttons must have a meaningful label. I've been guilty of this myself many times. When you build some blog website and you have a small read button below each list item on your main page. Screen reader users, they skim through the links, and then after every list item, they get another link that says read. Well, links shouldn't be buttons. That's I also mixed something up there. But there's two ways. This is an icon button. Icon buttons are also, if not used properly, horrible for accessibility, because you have a button, it has no text content, it only has some image, and the screen reader will just say, well, it's some icon, I don't know what that is. There's no semantic meaning to it whatsoever. And there's two ways you can fix that. You can either use the ARIA label attribute, which will be read out by the screen reader, and then you would put ARIA hidden on the icon because the screen reader really doesn't care about the icon. Or alternatively, and that is, for example, important if you have a multi-language website, because HTML attributes will not be translated, you will use a screen reader-only CSS class to visually hide this element from the user, from sighted users, but it will still be accessible to screen readers. So that's two ways to do that. Another very important one, respect heading hierarchy. It's often broken, and what you should watch out for here is that every page should only have one H1 element, and you should not break the hierarchies. If you have an H1 that's followed by an H2 that's followed by an H4, then that's bad. Where's the H3? And also give them a good semantic structure. Here we see two H1s, that's bad, and the one afterwards is an H3. And what we want actually is one H1 and two H2s, because how to get to the conference is not really related on how to buy the tickets. So also think about how you implement the hierarchy of your headings consciously. Next one, the focused element on a website should always be identifiable as such. This CSS, I have written it myself in the past. I'm guilty because someone said the focus styles are ugly, is very dangerous for keyboard users, because when you only use your keyboard to navigate a website and you look away because somebody asks you a question and then you no longer know where you're on the page, that is bad. You don't need to use the native browser outlines. They actually look quite different depending on which browser you use, but they do a decent job. You can also implement your own custom outlines, no problem. Just don't hide them altogether. Another important one is text contrast. And here I really like that modern browsers make it quite easy to quickly find issues in this regard. So you can see here that Chrome has highlighted the contrast here as 1.98. It should be more than 4.5, so we're quite far away here. So that was my personal know in your sleep checklist. It's 6 items. I'm going to show it again in the end. And how can you test this stuff? So there's a few tools you have available. There's your keyboard. Just try using only your keyboard navigating the page. There's screen readers. For those of you who have used macOS, use Apple VoiceOver. You can activate it by pressing Command F5, read about the controls, and give it a try. It's fun. You can contract people who offer testing audits. And there's really nice browser extensions. My favorite one is XDevTools. I included a video here. So by using the XDevTools browser extension, it will scan your page and provide you with all the issues that it found. And yeah, it's just super convenient. I highly recommend it. Finally, here's another call to action. I need you to spread the word about accessibility. It is still a somewhat underrepresented topic in the scene. Yeah, I would be really glad if you feel encouraged to start your accessibility journey. And you are not alone. So these are a few people that I follow on Twitter. I highly recommend checking them out. They publish some really nice blogs as well. And yeah, that's it. I hope you enjoyed this trip to the beach, a small beachcation. Keep expanding your accessibility knowledge by asking more questions. Come chat with me and my colleagues right in front of stage 5. And yeah, thank you so much for listening.